Greetings, I'm Zachary Hepner. I'm pleased to share this Dvar Torah with you for Parashat VaYishlach, the narrative of Absalom's seditious enterprise in 2 Samuel 15, 16, and 17 require a close reading to see how it echoes the first half of Parashat VaYishlach. This will lend many insights, including the midrashic source of Esau's untimely death and the very rare case of the verse in Genesis 25 that the masoretic texts cuts in half. After Absalom returns from exile, after he had murdered his half-brother Amnon, he devises a plan to gain popularity. He leaves to Hebron under false votive pretenses. His sycophants declare him king. When word gets to King David, David flees without a fight with his entourage. David is greeted by Mefibotshet, King Saul's lame grandson. David is bullied by Shimi the Benjamite without reprisal. Chusha remains in Jerusalem as David's spy, unsuccessfully. Chusha is given a clearance by Absalom. Publicly, Absalom engages sexually with David's concubines. Achitophel suggests Absalom gather 12,000 troops and pursue David post-haste. However, Chusha suggests Absalom wait before attacking. When Achitophel learns that Absalom had dismissed his advice, he strangles himself. David reaches Machanaima, and the events began to turn in David's favor. Parashat VaYishlach goes like this. David had misled Lavan and fled to the Holy Land and arrived in Machanaim. David struggles with the Jabberwocky at the river Yabok, who renders Jacob lame. After delivering many gifts to Esau, the twins make up, though Jacob makes an excuse to move on to Shechem, where he sets up an altar. Chapter 34 consists of the seduction of Dinah and the unresolved dispute between Jacob versus Simon and Levi. The local inhabitants do not gang up against Yaakov. Devorah, Rebekah's Mesopotamian handmaid, dies and is buried at the weeping tree. Then Reuven lies with Bilhah, Jacob's concubine, Rachel's former handmaid. The verse is bisected and finishes that Jacob had 12 sons. Jacob returns to Hebron and Isaac dies. Let's proceed to read the texts closely. Both Yaakov and Absalom had been in exile due to fraternal unresolved issues. Additionally, both were leaders and misleaders. Vayignov Avshalom et lev anshe Yisrael, Vayignov Yaakov et lev Lavan ha'arami. Jacob had misled Lavan. Avshalom misled the public. Jacob names the place he sees the angels Machanaim. The events in the Absalom story turn to David's favor when he reaches Machanaima. Absalom misleads David by going to Hebron for his votive offerings. Vashalem et nidri asher nadarti, ki neder nadar. Yaakov too had taken oaths that were contingent upon his safe return from Aram. Vayidor Yaakov neder, vayidar neder. Further connections. The laming of Yaakov by the Jabberwocky echoes Mefibotshet, Saul's grandson, who is lame and does not leave Jerusalem. In this narrative, Mefibotshet is loyal to David, who is duped by his butler, who usurps Mephiboshet's estate, while Jacob is concerned about his estate, both in the text and the midrash. Further connections are Vishavti v'shalom and Vayomer lo hamelech lech b'shalom. The next connection is the Benjamite and Saul loyalist who curses David as David passes by. An oblique reference to Saul as a representative of Esau is that at the end of Vayigash, a descendant of Esau is called Saul, Vayimloch tachtav Shaul, a descendant of Esau. Shimi ben Gera curses David in the hill's shade, but Tselah Hahar. Tselah echoes Yaakov, who limps, v'hu tzoleya. Now for an unusual word, rakim. That is the excuse Yaakov uses to depart from Esau. The children are rakim, hayeladim rakim. This word is also used to describe Leah's eyes, but its meaning is not fully understood. It resonates with the text in Shmuel. Vayavo hamelech v'chol ha'asher ito ayefim vayinafesh sham, which in context means David's men were exhausted and they took a rest. Jacob's children, too, were rakim, which means they were exhausted, which also makes sense due to them being up late the previous evening and what is called post-adrenal fatigue that follows a flight or flight phase. And if so, this explains Leah's eyes, which are described as rakut, meaning they looked tired or baggy. Now to the Chusha and Shimi episode. Chusha and Shimi fill missing links as a source for a rich midrash about Esau that seemingly has no source. After Yaakov's death, his son proceeds to the Ramarat HaMachpelah. Esau stops the hearse from proceeding, claiming title to the cemetery plot. Dan's deaf son, Chushim, which resonates with Chusha, is confused due to his deafness. Naphtali, an ultra-marathoner, runs back to Egypt to get the title. In the meanwhile, Chushim, in his confusion, swings his sword, off comes Esau's head, and rolls into the cave where it remains today, bodiless Uncle Esau. This midrash echoes when Yoav tells David about Shimi, va'asira et rosho, let me decapitate him. David prevents Yoav from doing so. Then the advice that Chushim gave Absalom causes Achitophel to strangle himself, a more subtle form of decapitation. The swift Naphtali echoes the only other marathoners in Tanakh. In chapter 18, Achimatz and the Ethiopian, Vayarz Achimatz derech hakikar, vayavor et hakushi. Now to the death of Devorah. The peculiar non sequitur account of the death of Rebekah's nursemaid can be better understood in light of Vathamot Devorah meneket Rivka vatikaver mitachat levetel tacha el tachat ha'alon vayikra shemo alon bachut. Rebekah's nursemaid is buried under the tree, and it was named the weeping tree. The weeping is also without context. Absalom is killed while hanging from a tree. Odenu chai belev ha'elah. The weeping eulogy that David gave for Absalom is one of the most emotional and moving verses in Tanakh. I read it in English. And the king was much moved and went up to the chamber over the gate and wept. And as he went, thus he said, O my son, Absalom, O my son, Absalom, would I had died for thee. O Absalom, my son, my son. And it was told Yoav, behold, the king weeps and mourns for Absalom. Acharon aviv. Now for the main course of this Dvar Torah. Avshalom publicly takes David's concubines. And in the next verse, Vayomer Achitophel Avshalom evcharana shnei masar elef ish. Achitophel advises a pursuit of 12,000 troops. This echoes the verse in Genesis. Vayelech Reuven vayishkav et Bilha peleg hashavi vayishma Yisrael vayuvenim Yaakov shnei masar. Reuven lies with Bilha, his father's concubine. Israel heard. Jacob is called Israel, as if his learning of the events is in place of the public. And then an unusual break in the verse. The latter part of the verse concludes that Jacob has 12 sons. This echoes the 12,000 troops Achitophel wanted to gather. The million-dollar question is, why was that verse cut in half by the Masoretes? But in context of the Absalom narrative, it becomes more clear. The treasonous events all went as planned, including the taking of David's concubines. But the events started to turn in David's favor immediately afterwards. In Genesis 35, Reuven attempted seizure of the birthright or seniority. It may have been egregious, but then there is a gap. There was repair. They all came out fine. Or did they? To recap, we have seen connections between the seditious part of Absalom's enterprise and the first half of Parashat VaYishlach. The limping Jacob and Mefibotshet echo significantly. We found more meaning with the word rakot, which resonates, Leah's eyes. The significance of Chusha and Shimi with the midrash of Esau's untimely death. The strange event of the tree that Rebekah's handmaid had been buried under. And finally, more meaning with Absalom and Ruvain and the concubines, followed by the significant number 12. 12 sons of Jacob and 12,000 troops who did not storm David's hiding place. Can one ever read Lewis Carroll's poem without its midrashic subtleties? Esau's angel is the jubjub bird. The frumious bandersnatch is Achitophel. The tumtum tree is both Alon Bachut and Absalom's tree. The defeat of the Jabberwocky by both Jacob and Yoav indeed have bitter-sweet endings. 'Twas brillig and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the bora groves, and the mome raths outgrabe. Beware the Jabberwock, my son, the jaws that bite, the claws that catch. Beware the jubjub bird, and shun the frumious bandersnatch. He took his vorpal sword in hand, long time the maxome foe he sought. So rested he by the tumtum tree, and stood all while in thought. And, as in uffish thought he stood, the Jabberwock with eyes of flame came whiffing through the tugly wood, and burbled as it came. 1, 2, 1, 2, and through the vorpal blade went snicker snack. He left it dead, and with its head he went galumphing back. And hast thou slain the Jabberwock? Come to my arms, my beamish boy. O frabjuste kalu kalei, he chortled in his joy. 'Twas brillig and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the bora groves, and the mome raths outgrabe. Wishing you all a Shabbat Shalom.